Hello and welcome. My name is Zaffar Iqbal and you are watching the Mojo Story. Prime Minister Modi met with President Vladimir Putin at the recently concluded SCO summit meeting, wherein he criticized the Russian president on its war with Ukraine. Modi said, and I quote, "I know that today's era is not an era of war, and I have spoken to you on the phone about this." Now, earlier, Putin had conceded that in his meeting with the Chinese President Xi, concerns were raised by the Chinese about the Ukraine war. Now, meanwhile, the White House, in a statement, has said that the Russian president is isolating himself from the international community. To discuss this and other developments at the SEO summit meeting, we're joined today by an eminent panel. We're joined by Sushant Sareen, strategic affairs expert. We're also joined by Major General Dhruv Katoch, Director, India Foundation, and we'll also be joined by Ambassador KB Fabian, former diplomat. But before I go to the panelists, let's hear what exactly Prime Minister Modi told President Putin.
एक्सेलेंसी, मैं आपका और यूक्रेन दोनों का इस बात के लिए आभार व्यक्त करना भी चाहूंगा, क्योंकि जब शुरू के दिनों में इस संकट के काल में हमारे हजारों स्टूडेंट्स यूक्रेन में फंसे हुए थे, आपकी और यूक्रेन की मदद से हमारे स्टूडेंट को हम सुरक्षित रूप से बाहर निकाल पाए, उनके घर तक हम पहुंचा पाए, और इसके लिए मैं आप दोनों देशों का आभारी हूं। और एक्सेलेंसी, मैं जानता हूं कि आज का युग युद्ध का है नहीं, और हमने फोन पर भी कई बार आपसे इस विषय में बात की है कि डेमोक्रेसी और डिप्लोमेसी और डायलॉग, ये सारी बातें ऐसी हैं कि जो दुनिया को एक स्पर्श करती है। आने वाले दिनों में शांति के रास्ते पर हम कैसे बढ़ सके, उसके विषय में जरूर आज हमें चर्चा करने का मौका मिलेगा। आपका व्यू पॉइंट समझने का मुझे भी एक अवसर मिलेगा, लेकिन फिर भी जो विषय हैं जिसकी बातें मैं करता रहता हूं।
President Putin responded to what Prime Minister Modi told him. This is what he had to say.
I know about your position on the conflict in Ukraine, and I know about your concerns. I know that you share these concerns, and we want all of this to end as soon as possible. But the other party, the leadership of Ukraine, has claimed that they refuse to engage in negotiating process. They said that they want to achieve their objectives, as they say, on the battlefield militarily. We will keep you abreast of everything that is happening over there.
Very important exchange, Sushant Sareen. What should we read in the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin?
Well, I think it was good. I think it was very good diplomacy on both sides, I would say. From the Indian side, I think the position which the Prime Minister has taken, he has made it very clear that this is not the era of wars, and that he has expressed himself against the war, and the fact that he has spoken on multiple occasions with Mr. Putin and apprised him of his concerns and India's concerns about this war, something which Mr. Putin himself acknowledged. Now, frankly, to say that he was sharply critical, I don't think he was. I think he was putting his position on the table for the world to see, and the response from many of the detractors of India's policy over the last 6-8 months has been that, well, Mr. Modi has spoken quite openly and candidly with Mr. Putin. On the other side, I think if I was to look at the whole conversation, I would say that there seems to be, if other countries want to use this opportunity, I think there is enough in what Mr. Putin said, for example, to start some kind of a negotiation process again. I don't know whether it's too late. I don't know whether anybody's even interested in negotiations anymore,
Yeah.
and whether the war has run out its course. But I think some kind of an opening, perhaps a very small opening, has also been given. Please also look at it, Zaffar, which I find something very interesting. The body language was very relaxed on both sides. It wasn't as though, Mr. Putin was taken by surprise by what Mr. Modi said. And Mr. Modi was also speaking in a fairly relaxed kind of a tone, in a very conversational kind of a manner.
Yeah.
And then what was even more surprising for me, and Mr. Fabian is a veteran diplomat. He can shed more light. But from my perspective, the fact that Mr. Putin was holding cards in his hand and reading from that, I don't remember him doing it very often, which is why I say that maybe in the way and the position he took, there is an opening if somebody wants to grab that opening. And perhaps this entire conversation was, in a sense, choreographed, that Mr. Modi will raise this issue and Mr. Putin can say whatever he wants to say. And he had his cards in his hand and he was reading from his cards and making his position clear.
That's a very interesting observation. That's an extremely interesting observation. But Ambassador KB Fabian, do you think such a thing could have happened? Perhaps it was a choreographed exchange. What Prime Minister Modi said and how President Putin responded, because he was reading from those cards, and both the leaders seemed quite relaxed.
Well, I wouldn't use the adjective choreographed, but I would say that in such delicate situations, the diplomats on both sides sit down and try to figure out what is the best way we can do it. Therefore, it is not unusual for the ambassador representing A to tell the ambassador representing B, listen, this is what my president or prime minister wants to say, and what would be your response? So there can be a little bit of play acting at the level of the diplomats, and they can agree on, okay, let us try to do it in this particular way. So that might have happened, and that is nothing unusual, because these are situations where the business of diplomacy is to smoothen things out, and neither India nor Russia wanted a public confrontation. And to my mind, Prime Minister Modi has chosen his words most carefully, by saying that this is not the era for war. And Putin's response also, that we want to end it as soon as possible, that also was very carefully chosen. So both sides may have gone through it and done it, which is a good thing.
But one got the impression that Putin seemed to be on a defensive, talking about negotiations, dialogue, and saying that the other side insists on war and on solving the issues on the battlefront. Major General Dhruv Katoch, did you sense that he was sort of isolated and put in some sort of a corner, and that's why he was responding in that way?
Thank you, Zaffar. No, you see, when you actually look at the war in Ukraine, I think there are a few things which need to be comprehended. One, Russia was hoping for an early military victory. If they could have done something and got a change of regime in the first 48 hours, which is what they were hoping for, well, that didn't come about. And then the Western nations came and started supporting Ukraine. The war dragged on. You see, now with the counteroffensive being launched by Ukraine, and they have taken certain tactical objectives, Ukraine is not in the mood to let go, and Russia, under any circumstances, will not vacate the areas it has taken. That is where the stalemate lies. Because at this point of time, let us say if Ukraine was on the back foot and they were really stuck, there was a possibility of negotiations. Now with Ukraine also being in a position that, okay, not only can we hold ourselves, but there are small bits of territory here and there. It's a 1,000 plus kilometer front, so the Ukrainians will also get opportunities to capture certain areas, as they have done. Now the Russians are in a dilemma. I think they are not really in a position to say that we can impose military terms on you. And as the Ukrainian president has said, okay, but our terms are that you will vacate your territory, the territories you have captured, or let us settle it on the battlefield. So we are looking at a stalemate. And I think that should be a cause of concern for the rest of us. I don't see this moving anywhere, despite the President Putin having stated, okay, I'm willing to go for talks, but then, it cannot be on the battlefield as claimed by Ukraine. So he's shifting the onus on Ukraine, whereas Ukraine is shifted the onus on the president. So I think it is going to be a very delicate situation. Only one good point, which I think in this whole exercise, I think India has great credibility. And Zaffar, you would have noticed that India also had a bilateral, he met on the sidelines with President Erdogan. Now, Erdogan is the mediator as far as the Russians and the Ukrainians are concerned for the supply of wheat. Now, I'm seeing something in that. You see that perhaps with India's good officers and with Turkey already on board, can they come to some a face saver for both sides? Right. I think that is what we have to look for.
Face saver for both sides. But Sushant, Sareen, do you agree that there is a stalemate? And if there is a stalemate, how can that come to an end? India has clearly said that dialogue and diplomacy are the way forward. Do you think something on those lines will happen to end this stalemate and a face saver for Russia and some sort of a gain for the Ukraine, because they are capturing areas which are earlier occupied by Russians?
Yeah, Zaffar, you are asking me the impossible question to which there is no answer, and you yourself know that.
Yes.
Now you are asking me to stick a round peg in a square hole or a square peg in a round hole. Now, what the position which the Prime Minister took was morally and principally correct.
Yes.
But the problem is, and to say that dialogue and democracy and what is the third? There was a third D.
Diplomacy and dialogue.
Diplomacy, dialogue, and democracy. Yeah. This is the way forward.
Yeah.
Who can disagree with it, right? It's the right thing to say. It's the principled position to take. After having said that, the real problem is how do you translate it on ground? How does diplomacy work in a situation which General Katoch has very eloquently put out, that there is a military stalemate? The Russians have occupied roughly about 25% of Ukrainian territory, and at least 50% of that they have no intention of ever giving up. So how do you? What is the way forward? What does diplomacy solve? How do both sides save face? What is the trick that somebody will pull out of the hat to say that, okay, fine, this is something which saves face. This is something which saves the politics of both sides. This is something which is an honorable solution for both sides. Frankly speaking, I don't see any such thing coming forward anytime soon. So maybe the opening which we are talking about could be that as of now, some kind of a ceasefire is declared so that, at least people stop dying and more damage stops. And then, you go through that grind of diplomacy and try and find out some solution. Again, I might be being entirely naive when I'm saying what I'm saying. But while I say that an opening has been given, I don't know how deep and how far that opening will be be there, and I don't know how much even the Western countries who think that, look, I can fight the Russians till the last Ukrainian, and I'm basically fighting this war on the cheap, in a manner of speaking. Why would they want to not rub Mr. Putin's nose in the dust? On the other hand, Mr. Putin himself would not want to be seen to be backtracking, because then that has very severe repercussions for him. So, like I said, you're asking the impossible question and expecting me to answer it.
Yeah, it's clearly an impossible question. Nobody knows what's going to happen. But Ambassador Fabian, but would you agree that President Putin has terribly misjudged the situation right from the time Russia invaded the Ukraine? The war has dragged on for all these months. Perhaps that was not expected.
Yes, but before that, I want to make another point. I'm not sure that there is a stalemate as yet, because Russia holds, if I remember right, about 120,000 square kilometers, and Ukraine has taken back about 6,000 square kilometers. So there is, from that point of view, there is no stalemate as yet. Russia still holds, as already mentioned, 20 or 25% of Ukrainian territory, and it has no intention of vacating that. Now, this war can go on because who wants an end to it? Certainly not Zelensky, certainly not Biden, who has an agenda that is to weaken Russia and, if possible, topple Putin. So I don't think the war aims have been met, and nor are they fully exhausted. So I'm afraid the war will continue. Now let us see what happens during the winter, whether the Europeans who might be shivering through the winter might see some sense in sort of actively seeking an end to this war. But we do not know. But as of now, it is Biden and Zelensky, and more Biden than Zelensky, who is sort of controlling what is happening on this side. And Putin, of course, is in trouble. As you correctly said, he had misjudged. But then you see, any war has unintended consequences. But Putin has gained territory, and let us see what happens.
Ladies and gentlemen, through Katoch, would you agree that what are the parties who want to end the war? We have to think about that. The Ukrainians, the American involvement, the Russians who perhaps misjudge the situation. Who would want to end the war? Russia has captured a large amount of territory. Ukrainians are capturing it back. This is going to continue for some time, and perhaps winter is going to be crucial.
Zaffar, you see, I don't see this ending anytime soon, which is why I use the word stalemate. Stalemate, the implication is that neither side will be able to achieve a military decision. So when you cannot achieve a military decision, you will continue doing what you are doing. That's a stalemate. Mr. Fabian may have a different definition. I have no problems with that. Now, the situation was certainly misjudged because what President Putin really wanted was a change in regime, which he thought he could effect quickly. Now, that didn't happen because of, I would say, to a very large extent, the incompetence of the military leadership of the Russians. They certainly misjudged the situation, and I'm not really sure what sort of advice they gave their president, but the way they went about it was disastrous. I mean, any military chap will tell you that, because now the information has started trickling in. You see, Russians, let us get into certain interests as far as Russia is concerned. Their vital interest is the Black Sea. Crimea is vital to them, and they wanted a land link to Crimea to ensure that they don't have any problems again. So, which is why they went after Donbass, and then they took Mariupol, and you've got the land link now. The further, if the Russians wish to extend this conflict now, then they will have to take the complete belt of the Black Sea, you see, and make Ukraine an inland country, without any access to the oceans. Then their dependency on Russia will be total. Now, will Russia go down that path? Because that will be a break in the stalemate and achieving a tactical victory. For the Ukrainians, similarly, they've got to, they've got to evict the Russians from one or two major areas which they have captured. Donbass is out of the question. But can they take back Mariupol? Unlikely, but that possibility is greater than taking back Donbass, which I don't see it happening. Crimea, of course, is totally out of the question. So there is, the Russia lacks the capability to take over the whole country. They can't handle it. Ultimately, I'm not so sure whether it is Zelensky's war. Just one small point, it is not
Yeah.
Zelensky's war. This is the US war, period. And I think if you want it to end, Europe has to tell Biden, stop, no further. That NATO unity which has come in, if you don't break that unity, especially on the energy issue, I don't see this ending, because Europe is still behind Biden, but I don't know how long they will stay behind him. Zaffar.
Okay. Sushant, Sareen, I was before Putin met with Prime Minister Modi, he also met with the Chinese premier, and he said later after that meeting that China has expressed its concerns. What could be possibly Chinese concerns which they have conveyed to the Russians? And is it because the war has dragged on for so long that could be possibly one of the concerns of China? What exactly could they have conveyed to the Russian president?
Zaffar, before I come to your question, just something what General Katoch said,
Yeah.
And my disagreement on that. Look, this is not only America's war, it is equally Western Europe's war. Western Europe was just as concerned about Russia as what the Americans have. So I think out there, their interests converge. And I can tell you a number of meetings we've had with the NATO officials. They were very, very clear, especially the countries in north of Europe and east of Europe, that they saw Russia as the biggest adversary and the biggest threat. And the Russian invasion of Ukraine has only reaffirmed their fears of Russia. So I think they would want to double down on the Ukrainian war against the Russians, and if the Americans are backing it, I think so much the better for it. Now, whether they'll be able to tolerate the winter, how they will manage, the heating and all of that, they've been used to a very nice soft life, the good life. That is something I can't say. At least at the people level, there might be some problems, but at least the states in Europe seem to be on the same page as the Americans. And frankly, I think the Ukrainians also want to fight this war. Why do we underestimate the sense of nationalism among the Ukrainians who have been fighting against what is still a superpower of sorts, Russia?
Right.
And to fight them to a standstill, or at least hold their own, I think it's pretty creditable. Now, on what could China, what are the concerns of China? I think China's concerns are more or less the same as everybody else. Number one, the energy costs which have gone up. Please remember, the Chinese economy isn't exactly roaring right now. The Chinese have major problems with their own economic problems, and with energy prices going up, it's not going to be easy for the Chinese. Number one. Number two, the Chinese are seen to be very closely aligned with the Russians, which is again something which is irritating and irking the West. And they are seen as part of an amalgam, and the Chinese would like to dispel that impression, because even though they have very important strategic interests with Russia, the fact of the matter remains that the Chinese dukaan to chalti hai with whatever goods they export and the trade which they have with Western Europe and with the United States. So I think there are those concerns as well. Then there are other concerns of the Chinese that, look, if this axis continues to deepen and this problem continues to deteriorate, then where does China stand? How far can the Chinese stay with the Russians? Something which is something which we will also have to consider as we go along. So I think the concerns are more or less the same. The only thing is how those concerns are being put, and to what extent the Russians are willing to take those concerns into consideration. And even if they are ready to take them into consideration, what do they propose to do about it?
Right. One got the impression from President Putin that he seeks negotiations. He says the other side wants war and to sort out the issue on the battlefield. Ambassador Fabian, do you think that it's a tactic to force negotiations, to force people to come to the table by shutting the energy needs of Europe? That's another tactic that Russia has been resorting to.
Let me put it this way. I will not categorically say that President Putin really wants negotiations. You know, words are used in diplomacy to convey not only one's actual position, but also for many other purposes. Okay? So you cannot take words too seriously all the time. Now, just to come back to 2 points already raised, stalemate can also mean that neither side can lose or gain territory in a big way. Now, I am not sure whether we have reached that stage. Secondly, it was said that America is backing the war which Europeans are fighting. No, America is leading the war. And while I agree that Europeans are worried about Russia, they fear Russia, but I think the protagonist, the one who takes the decision as a leader, that is Biden. There is no doubt at all. Now, whether there will be any immediate end to this war, as other distinguished speakers have also said, I don't think there is any good reason to believe that it is going to be the case, because neither side is exhausted. You get a ceasefire when both sides are exhausted. That is not the case. You get a ceasefire when both sides think, that they can't gain further. That is not the case. So I'm afraid this war will go through, and we'll have to wait what happens during the winter, and whether the Europeans will change their mind. And they will change their mind not because the political leadership will change their mind. That they will change their mind if people demonstrate. And demonstrations have already taken place in France and Germany against the cost of living. So we have to watch and see.
Yeah, it's not going to end so soon. There are so many dimensions to it. But Major General Dhruv Katoch, I also wanted to ask about Prime Minister Modi, who spoke about transit access between the member nations, probably referring to Afghanistan, the wheat that was supplied to Afghanistan through Pakistan, and that suffered many delays. How do you that's an important point that was touched upon by the Indian side.
No, I think the Prime Minister put it very correctly that, listen, that if we are the SCO, we are a group of just a small bunch of countries, but we are the ones. Very important for India.
Okay, we seem to be having some problem with the line there. Can you hear us, Major General Dhruv Katoch? Okay, there's some problem with the line. Sushant, Sareen, the same question to you. What's the sense that you get? Prime Minister touched upon a very important issue, the transit access. Afghanistan sending wheat that took months till it was cleared, and then the process started from sending wheat through Pakistan to Afghanistan.
Again, maybe I'm in a minority on this particular issue, but I personally think that, again, while in principle it's all very well to talk about connectivity and stuff like that, connectivity is something which works both ways. That if this is if we are saying that, okay, fine, and it's a kind of a dig at the Pakistanis that they have been blocking access for India, and that eventually if a land route has to be there, then connectivity through Pakistan, Afghanistan into Central Asia becomes a reality. But the opposite is also true. It's not just that things are going to only flow from India's side upwards. Things will also flow towards India, right? And then, Zaffar, you've been in Kashmir. We've seen what happened during the LOC trade. We've seen what happened between the India-Pakistan trade at Wagah. All the problems which were associated, and I mean the law and order problems, drug trafficking and what have you, including gun running, all sorts of nefarious activities. Are we ready to face up to that? If indeed this kind of transit corridors start up with Pakistan being what Pakistan is, and connectivity. It's all very well to talk about connectivity, but do we really want that? Number one. Number two, if tomorrow or maybe 3 years from now, you have other countries which are dialogue partners right now, Nepal, for example, becoming part of this whole system, then you will have to give transit all through your landmass all the way to Nepal. Are you ready to do that? Have we thought this through? So maybe I'm in a bit of a minority on this particular issue, but I'm very deeply skeptical about, this whole transit and connectivity business. But Zaffar, one more point. At the end of the day, look at the trade numbers. Afghanistan is gone. It's finished. It has no economy, right? Even if supposing you get transit rights to go to Afghanistan, what is it going to bring to your table? I think you will spend more in fuel reaching Afghanistan than what you will get in returns. Number one. Okay, I'm being a little facetious out here, but that's the fact. Similarly, if you want to go to Central Asia, there are already other routes available for you to reach Central Asia. Why do you need to use the Pakistani route to go to Central Asia? So I think, we need to think this thing through.
You raised a very important point that it works both ways. I remember when the trade route, LOC trade route was opened, we covered that it was opened with a lot of fanfare, and now it's been closed. There is no trade taking place at any of the LOC points, though it was a barter system. There was no currency involved in that trade. But Major General Dhruv, Katoch, there's another important element to all of this. That is the China-Pakistan equation. The Chinese president has reportedly called on Pakistan to provide solid protection to its citizens in Pakistan, a very important element that perhaps needs to be discussed. China telling Pakistanis that please provide protection to our people who are working there on different projects. At the same time, maintaining that we are best of the friends.
Actually, Chinese concerns on terrorism, I think, are very lopsided because they are looking at it from a totally Chinese-centric viewpoint. When it comes to international terrorism, there has been absolutely no concern on the part of the Chinese, except to what the Uyghur minority, which is there within Pakistan, what they can do to China. That is their only level of concern. Now, unfortunately for China, this is one thing which is really going to hurt them very badly, because any of these terrorist groups, especially the ones which are within Afghanistan, under no circumstance will they hand over any of those people to China. That goes against the very ideological concept of the Taliban state. To some extent, they may... Oh, I think I've got cut again. Yeah, to some extent, again, the Afghans may relocate the Uyghur groups, but that's about it. Within Pakistan, I'm afraid the TTP is not going to let go. So the TTP and the Baloch rebels, they will take on the Chinese because that is the only time the Chinese react. So beyond a certain point, giving protection, I think, is out. That is why I have felt that any Chinese investment within Pakistan will always remain under threat unless both Pakistan and Afghanistan stabilize and become peaceful countries. I don't see that happening in the near future. So that's one point. One more point.
Yeah.
Just one small point. As far as the land connectivity between Afghanistan is concerned, I think what we are really looking at is a connectivity for oil and gas, not free trade of goods and people. That is not going to happen. Zaffar.
Okay. Last word to you, Ambassador Fabian. Do you think, from the point of view of Russians, from the point of view of Putin, it was a successful sort of a summit there at Samarkand? And do you think what happened there, would Putin now go for the G20 summit, which is happening later this year in Indonesia, or he may try to avoid that, given what has happened in Samarkand?
I think Putin, that was not a bad summit for Putin. And you might have noticed that in the statement which was issued, the references to Ukraine, well, there was no reference to UN Charter and all that. So Putin had, the Russians could change some language. And as regards Indonesia, G20, well, my impression is that he will certainly go.
He will go. So obviously, Ambassador Fabian saying that it's been a successful visit from the point of view of Russian. That brings us to the end of our discussion today. Thanks to all our panelists for joining us today. That's all we have in today's show. Thanks for watching.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.